The braking burn died at ZO400 ship reckoning, and the first scan of Earth came back wrong in 4 different ways before Ren Calloway had finished, unstrapping from the signal bench. Wrong one, the night side of the planet was not dark. The hold book said Earth's night side glittered in patches, cities strung like salt spilled along coastlines, with great black gaps of ocean and desert between them. What turned below the long lantern's bow was a hemisphere veined in light from pole to pole, and the light was not the amber of the old photographs. It was green-white and moving, slow rivers of it, as if the whole dark face of the world were a current. Wrong too, there was a ring around the Earth. Not debris, not a moon. A built thing thin as wire at this distance, catching dawn on its sunward arc, a single continuous band of structure around the equator of her ancestors' planet, where the hold book promised nothing but weather satellites and the cold junk of the early launch age. Wrong 3. The radio was silent. 247 years of family instruction had prepared Ren for this moment her entire life. Find the old traffic bans, the ones written in her grandmother's hand on the 3rd page of the book, and listen for the noise of mankind. She had the frequencies memorized the way other children memorize songs. Every one of them was empty. Not dead empty, not static, clean swept, courteously vacant, like a room kept dusted for a guest who never came. And wrong 4, the wrongness that would matter, had not happened yet. It was waiting for her to key the handshake. Voice of the hold, said Shipmaster Othran from the high bench, in the Cessarid trade tongue that was Ren's first language before her own. His voice had the texture of an overcast sky, which for a Cessarid meant patience stretched thin over worry. We are at the threshold your ancestors set. Speak their words. Ren looked down at her hands on the bench. Human hands, 19 years old, born 40 trillion kilometers from the planet on the screen. Around her on the command ring stood beings of gray down and lamplight eyes, 2.5 meters tall, the youngest of them 4 times her age, and every one of them was watching the small human at the signal bench the way you watch a key approach a lock. She keyed the transmitter to the frequency on page 3 of the hold book, the private band, the one that belonged to a single launch pad on a single hill on the planet below, and spoke the sentence her grandmother had taught her as a lullaby, the sentence that had crossed 9 generations of her family folded inside bedtime in grief and stubbornness, waiting for a mouth to carry it home. Turn hill light, turn hill light. This is colony vessel Meridian, returning. The field is dry. Half a phrase. The other half lived on Earth, if anything lived on Earth that remembered. The beacon it was meant for had been built to guide one ship out and home again, and that ship had died in the deep void 238 years ago, with her family's whole line aboard. No one had ever answered the phrase, because the phrase had never been sent. The plan Ren had rehearsed since she was 6, assumed nothing but ruin or strangers at the other end. You will say the words anyway, her grandmother had told her, because the words are how Earth will know whose children you are. The answer came back in 0.41 seconds. Meridian turn hill light. A voice, a recorded voice, an old voice, calm as a closed door. And the light is green. The command ring of the Long Lantern, a vessel 7 kilometers from Ram to Drive Bell, crewed by 378 Cessarid, who between them had outlived empires, went silent enough that Ren could hear the air handlers breathe. 0.41 seconds. Light lag to the surface and back, plus nothing. No processing pause. No waking up stutter of antique hardware climbing out of 2 centuries of sleep. The beacon had answered as if it had been sitting forward in its chair for 247 years. That is not possible, said Sen. The watch officer, his down lifting along his forearms, a maintained relic might answer. It does not answer instantly. Something on that hill is awake. The voice on the band changed. The recording fell away and something live came on in its place. Live, fluent, and speaking a language that no longer quite existed. The launch control dialect of the hold book, the clipped old cadence of Earth's early spacefaring age, pronounced with the faint careful music of someone who had learned it the way scholars learn a beautiful dead thing. Meridian, turn hill. We have your handshake, we have your hull, and we have held Corridor 9 for you for 247 years. State souls aboard and be advised, you are expected. Ren's mouth went dry. Beside her, she heard Othran rise from the high bench, all his great gray height unfolding, and she knew without looking that his down had gone flat with shock, because hers would have too, if she'd had any. Expected, not remembered, not welcomed the way you welcome the dead returning. Expected, the way you speak of a ship that is merely late. They held a corridor, Ren said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She tried again, and this time it came out as the voice of the hold, the office her grandmother had died holding. Shipmaster. They kept our landing slot. For 2.5 centuries, it's still ours. Or it is a snare 2.5 centuries deep, Othran said. But he said it in his falling pressure voice, The one that meant he did not believe his own caution, and his eyes never left the green-veined planet on the screen. From the back of the command ring, dry as old paper, came the voice of Ishian, 300 years old, eldest aboard, the one who had been a young deckhand the day the lantern found 60 starving humans in a broken hull in the middle of the long dark. "No snare waits that long," Ishian said. "Patience like that is not a hunter's. I have only ever seen it in two things, in stone and in love." Wren had grown up inside the answer she gave next. There had been a night she was 6, the recycler garden dim for sleep cycle, her grandmother Esther braiding her hair with hands that had never once touched the planet they came from. "Say it, little bird. The field is dry." And Wren, half asleep, "And the light is green. What does it mean?" Her grandmother's fingers had not stopped moving. "It means it is safe to come home. It is the last thing Earth said to us when we left. When you say our half, Earth will say theirs. That is how it works, Wren. That is the whole of the law. Someone keeps the light, and someone comes home to it." Her grandmother had believed it the way you believe a thing you will never see. 8 others of the hold had died believing it, and here it was, 4/10 of a second old, hanging in the bridge air in a dead dialect spoken by a living voice. "State souls aboard," the voice from Turnhill said again gently, in that careful museum piece accent. "Take your time, Meridian. You've had a long road." Othrin looked at Wren. Cesserid Law ran the long lantern. The handshake was human law, older aboard this ship than most of the crew, and within its narrow channel the voice of the hold outranked everyone, the shipmaster included. It was the only power 34 humans held on a vessel of 412 souls, and no Cesserid had ever once suggested trimming it. A debt was a debt. The carry was the carry. Wren keyed the band. "Turnhill, Meridian. Souls aboard, 412. 34 are the line you knew. 378 are the people who carried us. The ship is not the hull you launched. Meridian died in the void in her 9th year. We come home aboard the one that found us. Her name is the Long Lantern, and she is owed by every human breathing on this band." Silence on the channel, a human-length pause at last, the first uninstant thing Earth had done. When the voice returned, the museum accent had cracked slightly down the middle, and what showed through the crack was young, and was not calm at all. "Copy 412, it said. "Copy the Long Lantern. Meridian, be advised the corridor is wide enough for her. We built it generous. Some of us always figured that if you ever came home, you wouldn't come home alone." Wren sat very still at the bench, because the alternative was not sitting still at all, and the voice of the hold did not weep on an open channel. Behind her, Ishian made the low rolling sound that Cesserid made at births. That was the 4th wrong thing, the one no scan had found. Earth had not forgotten them. Earth had not even merely remembered them, the way you remember the dead, with stones and anniversaries. Earth had planned for them, had sat down at some point in the long centuries, done arithmetic on grief, and built the answer wide enough to fit a rescue it had no evidence would ever come. Every story in the hold book had prepared Wren for ruins or for strangers. Not one had prepared her for this. The descent clock started at 0419 ship reckoning, and from that moment, none of them ever really stopped falling. The first hour of the corridor was procedure, and the procedure was where Earth began, politely and relentlessly, to come apart from everything the book had promised. Wren had memorized the arrival protocols of her ancestors' age the way she'd memorized everything else in the book. The declarations, the quarantine forms, the custom schedules, the orbital traffic etiquette, with its strict ladders of clearance. She had a speech rehearsed for the customs authority. She had the hold's manifest formatted to a standard 247 years dead, every birth and death aboard recorded in her grandmother's column-ruled hand and her own. There was no customs authority. There were no forms. "Meridian, your manifest is whatever you want to tell us, whenever you want to tell us," said the new voice on the band, a woman, Harbor Watch approach, who had introduced herself as Controller Maya Sen, and then, in a tone of furious composure, as third-generation registry, whatever that meant. "Earth requires exactly one thing of an inbound returner, and you already gave it, souls aboard. We don't count property at the door, not anymore. Stand by, I'm bringing the Garland's traffic around you. You'll see lanes dim sunward of your bow. That's deliberate. Your forward sensors are antiques, and we don't intend to dazzle them." Wren translated for the command ring as she went. Half the bridge crew now stood in a loose gray orbit around the signal bench, pretending to duties. "She says, the ring, the Garland. It's dimming its traffic lanes, for us, so our old eyes can see." Sen, the watch officer, looked at the main screen, where a band of moving lights as long as a world had in fact begun to bank itself down like a hearth at night, lane by lane by lane. A courtesy the size of an equator, his down lay flat. "How many vessels is that?" he said. It did not come out as a question. "Turnhill." Wren asked the band because the book demanded the numbers even if Earth didn't. "How much traffic are you moving aside? Today?" Light day, Maya Sen said. 11,000 hulls, give or take, between you and the deck. None of them mind. Most of them are listening to this channel right now, which is unprofessional and which I officially do not notice. A pause, and then, in the old dialect, awkward and exact, like a guest taking care with a family silver. They want to hear how you sound. You're a story here, Meridian. Our oldest sad one. Forgive us. Nobody at this desk ever truly thought the corridor would get used. Then why keep it, Ren said. She hadn't meant to ask it. It fell out of her 19 years of bunk time wondering, and it went out on an open channel to 11,000 eavesdropping hulls before she could call it back. Maya Sen answered without any pause at all, as if she'd had the answer loaded longer than Ren had been alive. Because the day we stop keeping it, she said, is the day it would have been needed. Ask anyone on this band. That's not policy, Meridian. That's just us. You'll see when you're down. Now, I show your trim 30 meters fat on the corridor ceiling and your spine flexing more than I'd like in the gradient. Talk to me about your hull, honestly, like I'm your engineer and not a stranger. Ren looked up at Othrin. This was the scene where the two laws aboard met. The handshake was hers, but the Long Lantern's body belonged to the Cesserid, and what Approach was asking for, a frank accounting of the old ship's weaknesses, handed to a foreign power on an open band, sat hard against 400 years of shipborne caution. Othrin's down rippled once, thinking. Then he stepped down from the high bench, crossed the signal bench, and did a thing Ren had never seen him do in 19 years. He bent his great gray frame nearly double, bringing his lamplight eyes level with the transmitter, addressing it directly, as if the small human machine deserved face. Earth voice, he said in his own tongue, slow so that Ren could shadow him in translation. I am Othrin, 40th shipmaster of the Long Lantern since her keel flame was lit. Hear what I tell you and weigh it honestly, for I have not said it aloud in 60 years. My ship is old. Her spine carries a fracture from the day she took the Meridian's people aboard. We broke our own back reaching them, and we have flown carefully ever since, the way an elder walks. She was never meant to make planetfall. No drift ship is. We had intended to take your high berth if you would give it, and send the children of your children down to you in skiffs. And then the faintest fold of stillness, and then ask leave to go, for the carry would be paid. He paused. Ren translated, her voice steady until the last sentence, which she had never heard said aloud either, and then ask leave to go. Of course. She had always known it the way you know winter is coming, and still flinch at the first cold. The Cesserid had spent 2.5 centuries on a promise. When it was kept, they would take their flame and their rings and their gray patience back out into the long dark to find what remained of their own kind, and the Long Lantern, the only home Ren or any of the 34 had ever had, would leave the sky. If Maya Sen heard the weight in it, she let it lie. Her voice came back flat and clean, a professional receiving load-bearing facts. Copy the spine, shipmaster, and thank you for the truth of it. Be advised we have your hull on deep scan, and my structures desk has been chewing their restraints for an hour. They flagged the fracture before you crossed the lunar line. We can see the old weld. We can also see what it cost you to take it. A breath's pause. Earth has carried that particular ledger entry for a long time, sir. 378 of you reached for 60 of ours and broke your own back doing it. That debt is recorded at the planetary level. I am required by statute to inform you of that. The statute is older than my grandmother, Ren translated. The command ring went very still, in the way of people hearing a stranger speak their dead's names correctly. Required by statute, Othrin repeated softly, in his far-weather voice. They wrote us into their law, little voice. Before they knew we existed, they wrote a debt to a hypothesis. Now, Maya Sen went on, brisk again, practical matters. Your spine concerns me in the descent gradient, even to high berth. I want to put a pilot aboard you, one of ours, trained for exactly this. We keep a cadre current on first launch age systems and protocols. Pilot rides your bench, reads your hull, talks to my desks in real time. It is the difference between descending carefully and descending blind. And before you answer, shipmaster, I'm told your people have laws about whose hands fly your ship, so let me say it plainly. We know we are asking something. Ren translated, and watched the words land like weather changing. No, said Sen flatly before Othrin could speak. No outside hand on the keel. The carry is ours to finish. 40 generations have flown this ship, and no stranger has ever. The carry is ours to finish, Othrin agreed, heavy and quiet. And Ren heard the trap close in his voice even as he said it, the old law and the old spine grinding against each other. To refuse the pilot risked the descent. To accept was to arrive at the end of 247 years of carrying in hand the last mile to someone else. To finish the longest promise in Cesserid memory with a stranger's fingers on the helm. He would refuse. She knew him. Pride and law would close over the risk like water, and they would ride a cracked spine down into a planet's gravity well on dignity alone. Wren was already pulling the hold book out of its case on the bench, leafing for a page she had read 100 times for no reason her childhood self could have named. Page 41. Her ancestors' world, its harbors and its ships, set down by the Meridian's first navigator so her descendants would know where they came from. Old sea custom kept alive into the launch age. Shipmaster. Her voice cracked the bridge quiet. Before you answer. There is a thing my people had, older than spaceflight, older than the book, harbor pilotage. She read it aloud, translating as she went, her finger under the faded hand. When a vessel makes a difficult port, a pilot of that harbor comes aboard, for no stranger can know the water like the one who lives on it. But hear the law's heart. The pilot advises. The pilot does not command. The master remains master, the crew remains the crew, the keel remains the keel. The pilot serves the ship. She looked up. It is not a hand on your keel, it is the harbor lending you its eyes under your command. My ancestors took pilots aboard for 2,000 years and never once surrendered a ship by it. The custom is in the book, which makes it the hold's law too. And the descent is the carry's last mile, which makes it partly the hold's to say. The bridge held still. Othrin looked at her for a long moment, lamplight eyes unreadable, and Wren held the book open like a small shield and did not look away. The pilot serves the ship, Othrin said at last, tasting it. He straightened to his full height in his down-settled, smooth decision calm. Then it is not a surrender. It is a service rendered between harbors. He turned to the transmitter, Earth voice. Send your pilot. They ride under my command, by the human custom written in the human book, and tell them they board the oldest keel they will ever touch, so they will wipe their feet. Wren translated everything but the last clause, hesitated, and translated that too. 11,000 eavesdropping hulls heard Earth approach control laugh on a working channel. Copy Long Lantern, Maya Sen said. Pilots away. Skiff designation Curlew, one soul aboard. His name is Dane Okafor. He stood his registry watch at Turnhill itself. And shipmaster, he has been begging for this duty since your drive flare cleared the orbit of Saturn. You will not find a human alive who will wipe his feet more thoroughly. Wren watched the skiff's mark separate from the bright lattice of Earth's. High traffic, and begin to climb the gap between the worlds of her blood and the world of her birth, and realized her hands were shaking. In 19 years aboard the Long Lantern, Wren Calloway had known exactly 33 other human beings, and she was related to every one of them. The 34th was 12 minutes out. The skiff Curlew came up the lantern's flank like a minnow tracking a whale, and half the hold turned out to the forward boat bay to watch it berth 14 humans in their best work cloth. Her father Joss at the front with the holdmaster's sash on, and behind them a standing crowd of Cesserid who had absolutely no duties in the boat bay, and had discovered some anyway. Ishan had been carried up from the garden ring in his chair. He claimed seniority gave him the right to be nosy. No one argued. No one had argued with Ishan since before Wren's grandmother was born. The lock cycled. The inner door swung. The man who stepped through was young, late 20s, Wren guessed, though she had only ever calibrated human ages against her own family. Dark, skin compact, in a slate-gray flight suit with a small embroidered bird at the collar and no other ornament. He had a kit bag on his shoulder and his cap in his hand. And at the threshold of the bay he stopped, and very deliberately, in front of 400 watching eyes, looked down and wiped his boots on the mat. A rolling murmur of approval went through the Cesserid like wind through a field. Then he straightened, and Wren watched Earth meet the hold for the first time in 247 years. She had expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Procedure. A salute. What happened instead was that Dane Okafor looked at the 14 humans standing in the boat bay of an alien generation ship, opened his mouth to deliver what had clearly been a rehearsed greeting, and failed entirely to say it. His eyes went along the line of them, the old faces, the young ones, her father's sash, the children peering from behind knees, and Wren saw the exact moment the professional in him lost a short, decisive fight with the human being. You look like the photographs, he said. Wrecked, hoarse, completely off script. 2.5 centuries and you. We have your crew portraits on the wall at Turnhill. The launch day ones. You look like you walked out of the frame. Joss Calloway, holdmaster, who had rehearsed his own greeting for 30 years and had it printed on a card in his pocket, abandoned it on the spot, crossed the deck, and embraced him. Wren stood in the bay with her people while the cheering went up. Human cheering thin and fierce, 14 voices. Cesserid approval vast and low, like the hull itself humming, and found that the moment had a shape her whole life had not prepared. Strangers were a thing in the book. She had read about strangers. Reading about water, her grandmother used to say, is not swimming. The pilot got a meal he was too polite to refuse and too overwhelmed to finish, and then Othrin took him forward and the work began. Dane Okafor rode the lantern's command ring the way a man rides a cathedral, reverent, terrified of touching anything and unable to stop looking up. But at the bench he was all business, and his business was frightening in its depth. He read the lantern's antique Sesserid instruments through Wren's translation for less than an hour before he started anticipating them. He spoke the old launch dialect like Maya Sen but better, almost unaccented. He had spent, he said, a year of his registry watch with nothing to do at 2 in the morning but the Meridian's original flight tapes, until he could hear her crew's voices in his sleep. You studied a dead ship's tapes, Wren said. For what? She was never coming back. He looked at her sideways from the bench. You kept a dead planet's customs forms, he said. For what? It was the first time anyone had ever answered the Hold's faith with Earth's, like for like, and it shut her up for a full minute. The descent toward high birth ran 9 hours, and Earth came up under them through every one of those hours like a story being retold by someone who had decided the original was too small. The Garland crossed below first, the equatorial ring resolved from a wire into a country, a built band kilometers wide, its interface a continuous terrace city looking up at the planet it served, its lanes of dim traffic flowing around the lantern's assigned corridor in long, courteous arcs. Wren had the watch beside Dane when the Terminator line crossed the ring's daylight arc, and she saw green on it, fields, orchards in orbit, on the underside of a bridge around the world. The book says you just started building footholds past the moon, she said. Outposts. Cans with solar panels. We had, Dane said. Then we had a bad century. Then we had a very good 2 of them. It's a long story. Everyone down there will want to be the one to tell you. 60 years for the ring's first arc. He nodded at the screen. It's named the Garland, official name. There was a competition, a schoolgirl one. There's nothing up here, voice of the Hold, that isn't carrying somebody's love on it somewhere. We got sentimental while you were away. The whole species. It's generally regarded as an improvement. Behind them, Sen the watch officer had stopped pretending he wasn't listening to translations. So had most of the ring. The Sesserid had carried the humans home expecting, at the journey's most hopeful end, to find the descendants of the launch age scraping along on a scarred and modest world. They had prepared, Wren knew from decades of overheard counsel, kindly speeches for a diminished Earth and quiet contingencies for a dead one. They had even prepared apologies for their own lateness, 2.5 centuries of it, drafted and redrafted in the long dark. Nobody had drafted anything for this. Watching the gray giants absorb Earth's actual size, beat by beat, hour by hour, the orbital shipyards like lit harbors, hulls in their cradles longer than the lantern herself, the catch meshes at the corridor's edge, patient and vast, dim to courtesy glow, the loom platforms shepherding a hurricane away from the descent path as gently as a hand steering a sheep, Wren understood for the first time that the Hold was not the only family aboard meeting a world that had outgrown its stories. Your weather, Sen said carefully, at hour 4, watching the hurricane bank away from their path under the loom's invisible pressure. You moved your weather. Borrowed it, Dane said. We'll put it back. It goes to sea, makes its rain where the rain's needed. Nobody owns a storm. You just ask it nicely with about 400 field anchors. He caught Wren's expression and misread it. It's all right. It's not for you. I mean, it is today, but it's routine. It's not that, Wren said. The interior of her chest felt the way the bridge had sounded at 0.41 seconds. Page 12 of the book. My 6 times great-grandmother wrote about the launch delay. Meridian sat on the pad 11 days waiting out storms. And the crew joked that mankind could cross the stars before it could do anything about the rain. She looked at the hurricane, walking obediently west. Everything in that book is like that. Every page is a wall you've taken down and nobody told the book. Dane was quiet for a moment. There'll be a lot of that down there, he said. For what it's worth, the registry has a word for it. For what you're about to go through. Returner's vertigo. The world being the wrong size for the stories you packed. He hesitated. It usually hits people who've been away 10, 15 years, cruise off the long mining loops. I won't pretend the scale of yours is in the manual. Does it pass? The vertigo passes. He chose the next words with visible care, antique dialect handled like glass. The size of it doesn't. You don't get the world you studied back, Wren. Nobody's that good a museum. You get this one. A beat. Most returners decide it's a fair trade. Some take a while, Wren thought, and put her hand flat on the hold book on the bench, on 9 generations of a world that no longer existed, lovingly preserved, every page wrong. Her grandmother had a saying for hard nights, half a joke and wholly a creed, and it surfaced now with the taste of the garden ring's recycled air around it. Wren had been 10, furious with grief over a thing she could no longer remember, and Esther Calloway had sat her down among the bean rows and said, "We are not keeping the book so that Earth will match it, little bird. Earth owes the book nothing. We are keeping it so that when we get there, Earth will know we never once stopped looking at her. The book is not a map. It is a love letter. Nobody checks a love letter for accuracy." Hour 6. The lantern crossed the garland's altitude through the assigned gap, and the entire visible arc of the ring's inner city flickered its lights. Once, twice, 3 times, a planet-scale lamp signal, the oldest code there was. "What are they saying?" Othrin asked. Dane looked up at the screen and cleared his throat. And for the second time since the boat bay, his voice came out imperfectly professional. "It's harbor code, sir. Pre-radio. Lightkeepers used it ship to shore. He had to stop and start again. 3 flashes is safe water. It means, come in, the channel's good." He pronounced the next part slowly. The way Ren was learning meant he was translating, not between languages, but between centuries. Every lightkeeper that ever used it meant the same single thing by it, and there's no tighter way to say it than the 3 flashes. "You are nearly home, and nothing between here and the dock will hurt you." Up and down the lantern 7 kilometers, through ring after ring, Ren heard the hull hum of the Cicerid answer a city the size of an equator. The long, rolling tone they made at berths. And then hour 7 came, and the spine spoke instead. Ren felt it before the alarms. Everyone born aboard felt it. The way you feel a wrong note in a parent's voice. A shudder through the deck plates. That was not the corridor's gradient, and not the trim burns. A deep structural sound like a far door slamming in a house, where every door was supposed to be still. The garden ring's birds went up all at once. A sound she had heard only twice in her life. Dane's boards lit before the Cicerid ones did. Earth's deep scan was watching the lantern's bones from outside. Ren watched his face do something she had not seen it do in 7 hours of antique instruments and impossible scale, and what it did was go still. "Long lantern," came Maya Sen's voice on the open band, dialect abandoned. Fast modern Earth speech that Dane was already half a sentence into translating. "Harbor watch. We read a propagation event on your spinal fracture. Forward third, 11 meters and walking. Confirm your boards." Sen's hands were moving over the structural array. His down had gone fully flat. "Confirm," he said. "The weld is the old weld is letting go." Copy a click. The channel's tone changed, and Ren would think, much later, that what came next was the precise moment she stopped being able to doubt anything about what Earth had become, because there was no fear in the voice at all, and no improvisation either. There was a person reaching calmly for a thing that had been kept loaded for longer than she had been. Alive. "Long lantern," shipmaster voice. "Be advised, Harbor Watch is declaring condition anchor on your behalf. You are about to see a great deal of our sky get very busy very fast. None of it is aimed at you. All of it is for you." "Define condition anchor," Othrin said. It was Dane who answered quietly, his eyes on his boards, his voice in 2 centuries at once. "It means Earth just cleared her whole harbor," he said. "It means every shoulder ship on the day side is lighting drives right now. It means my entire service has spent 80 years drilling a catch we hoped we'd never make, and the drill just went live." He looked up at the gray giants around the ring, at Ren, at the screen full of mother-of-pearl planet. "Shipmaster, Earth is going to ask your leave to put hands on your hull. I'd ask you to start thinking about your answer now, because if that fracture keeps walking, this isn't going to be a descent anymore." "What is it going to be?" Ren asked. "A catch," Dane said. The numbers arrived over the next 20 minutes the way bad numbers do. Singly, politely, each one worse than the last. The fracture had walked 11 meters, then 19, then stopped, then walked again. The lantern's forward third, the ram, the boat bays, the first habitat ring, with its 1100 Cicerid and the entire human hold, was now connected to the rest of her by a spine that Earth's structures desk described, in a phrase Dane declined for several minutes to translate, and then translated exactly, as a broken bone in a sling made of habit. She could not climb back out of the gravity well. The burn would snap her. She could not hold the high berth. The docking loads would snap her. She could not simply park in orbit and offload by skiff, because the fracture was walking on its own now with every thermal cycle, and the structure's desk gave the spine 30 hours, plus or minus 8, before the long lantern came apart at 400 kilometers of altitude and fell out of the sky over the course of a screaming, burning week. 7 kilometers of ship, 412 souls, and debris enough to lacerate the orbital lanes of the most inhabited sky in the history of the species below. Othrin took the numbers standing, the way he took everything. Then he said, "Clear the ring of all but watch crew," and when the ring had cleared, "Options." "3," said Sen. "First we offload by skiff, all souls as fast as the boats cycle. 11 hours if nothing jams. The ship is lost, she breaks apart in orbit, her bones fall on their world for a month. We would be raining a dead lantern on the people we came to repay." His down was flat as paint. "Second, we take her out, away from the planet, on a burn the spine cannot survive, and she breaks in deep water, clean of their sky. The souls forward of frame 200 would have to cross to the aft rings first, through the fracture zone, or ride the boats. The lantern dies in the dark, but she dies owing nothing. And third," Othrin said. Sen looked at the human pilot. "Third is theirs," he said. "I cannot evaluate it." Nothing in our fleet records can. There is no fourth drift ship in 40 generations that has been in this position over a living world, because no drift ship has ever been mad enough to bring her keel this deep into a well. It was not an accusation. It was, in the Cicerid way, almost a tenderness. The madness had been the carry, and the carry had been theirs by choice for 2.5 centuries. Dane stood. He had been sitting at the bench with his hands flat on his knees, waiting, with the discipline of a man who knew exactly how much weight his next words would have to carry, and had decided not to spend an ounce of it early. Third option, he said. Condition anchor, full execution, Earth catches her. He brought it up on the main screen as he talked. Feeds from Earth's own traffic plots, relayed open-handed, nothing withheld. Shooter ships. Heavy lift hulls, the Shorebird class. There are 41 of them, and as of 19 minutes ago, every single one is burning for you. They were built after the Calder Deep breakup, 81 years back, when we lost a habitat and 400 people because all our strength was in the wrong orbit on the wrong day. Earth decided that would not happen twice. So we built ships whose whole purpose is to put their shoulders under something dying and hold it up. The plot bloomed. 41 drive flares rising off the day side like sparks off a struck flint, converging on the corridor. They mesh. They've drilled the big catch every year for 8 decades. A hull your size is the design case, Shipmaster. The exercise is called Long Lantern Weather. I am not making that name up. I can show you 80 years of logs. When your drive flare crossed Saturn and the registry matched your profile, half my service wept and the other half went to quarters because we all knew which exercise had just stopped being an exercise. Wren translated, and her voice did not stay entirely level through the name of the exercise, and she did not care. They braced the spine, Dane went on. Externally, a sling of hulls, mesh, and thrust. The sling your structures are already using out of habit, except made of 41 ships. Then we don't try to save your orbit, we take her down. One controlled descent, flying the whole brace as a single vessel, into the catchwater, a basin on the Argent coast, 30 kilometers wide, dredged soft, kept clear, built after Calder Deep for exactly one purpose, so that anything that ever came home broken would have somewhere soft to be set down. He paused. It has never been used at full design case. You'd be the first. Your basin is 81 years old, Othrin said slowly, and has waited empty. We mow it, Dane said. There's a debate every budget cycle. The answer is always the same. He looked around the ring of gray giants. The answer is the same one Turnhill gave you, sir. We keep it because the day we stop is the day it's needed. Silence on the command ring, except for the far doors of the spine, slamming softly in the house of 40 generations. The souls, Othrin said. In your catch, if your mesh fails, if your sling slips the souls, boats stay hot the whole way down. Forward ring evacuates to the aft rings before we start. Everyone crosses the fracture zone while it's still quiet, or rides a skiff to a shoulder ship. By the time we commit to atmosphere, there is nobody forward of frame 200 and nobody aboard who isn't strapped within 30 seconds of a boat. He took a breath. I won't dress it. The descent is 2 hours and 9 minutes and there are 4 abort gates in it, and past the 3rd gate the aborts get ugly. My service's honest number for total loss of vessel is 1 in 200. For loss of life it is better than 1 in 10,000, because we will spend the ship before we spend a soul every time, and the basin is soft. And we have practiced spending the ship. His jaw set. And against that you hold the second option, which loses the lantern with certainty, in the dark, away from any hand that could help her. Those are the weights, Shipmaster. I'm required to give them to you straight, and required to tell you the choice is wholly yours. Earth does not board brace, or touch a sovereign keel without leave, not even to save it. And if leave is refused, Sen asked, if we choose the dark, then 41 shoulder ships fly escort to deep water, Dane said quietly, and Earth stands to honors while she goes, and we will grieve her like one of ours. It's your keel. He said the next part to Othrin, but he looked at Wren while he said it, because some things travel better through family. But I stood a year at Turnhill, sir. I've read every transmission your people ever sent and every one we ever sent back. 247 years ago, a voice on that hill promised a ship she would not be forgotten, and the whole world I come from is built out of the keeping of it. Don't ask Earth to watch a second ship die off that same hill with the light green, and the field dry. We have spent 80 years building the other ending. Let us fly it. The translation hung in the ring, and Othrin, 40th shipmaster of the Long Lantern, did the thing that Wren would tell for the rest of her life. He turned away from his officers, away from the pilot, away from the screen with its 41 rising sparks, and looked at the small human at the signal bench, and asked his question not to Earth but to the hold. Voice, he said. Your ancestors were a harbor people before they were a sky people. The book is full of ships saved and ships lost. I have heard you read it since you could stand on a chair to do it. Tell me what your dead would say. Ren stood. The whole book was under her hand, where it always was, and page after page turned through her head. But what rose wasn't a page. It was the garden ring its sleep cycle dim, and Ishin, years ago, telling her how the lantern broke her back. She had been 12, and she had asked why the lantern hadn't simply flown past the Meridian's wreck. The burn to reach it had been beyond the rated frame. Every Cicerid officer had known the spine would crack, and the lantern was a world of 9,000 then, risked whole for 60 strangers of a species they had never met. Ishin had been quiet a long time, and then he'd said, "Little bird," we heard them singing. The wreck's air was going, and their power was going, and they had a machine that threw their voices into the dark. And do you know what they used it for, at the end? Not for screaming. They sang to each other, in their hull, so the children would be less afraid. We did not break our back for 60 strangers. We broke it because we could not be the kind of people who hear that and pass by. The back heals crooked. The people heal whole. Your grandmother's grandmother taught me the song afterward. I will teach it to you. My dead would say what yours said, Ren answered, and her voice carried to the corners of the ring. 238 years ago, 60 of mine were the broken hull, and 378 of yours were the sky full of strangers, and you did not pass by. And the price was the spine, and the lantern has flown crooked and alive ever since. Crooked and alive, shipmaster, for 238 years. That is the whole of the book in one line. The carry was never a debt. She lifted the book and set it down again, flat like a judge. It was a kind of people. Theirs is the same kind, let them be it. Othrin stood motionless for the space of 3 long Cicerid breaths. Then his down settled, decision calm, and he turned to the transmitter and bent again to give the small machine his face, and spoke in the trade tongue with Ren's translation half a heartbeat behind. The two voices braided together on an open band at 11,000 hulls, and by then, though none aboard yet knew it, most of a planet had stopped to hear. Earth voice. This is Othrin, 40th shipmaster of the Long Lantern. My ship is dying of an old wound taken in good cause. You ask leave to put your hands on her. A breath. Leave is granted. Catch her if you can. The reply took 2 full seconds, an eternity by the standards of that channel, and when it came, it was not Maya Sen alone. There was a depth behind her voice, a room full of voices, a service holding its breath at the top of an 80-year drill. Long Lantern Harbor Watch, she said. Leave received and logged at the planetary level. A click, the channel going wide, and the next words went out. Ren realized, not just to the ship, they went out over Earth, to the basin crews and the shoulder fleets and the school children who would skip lessons for the next 2 days, the formal opening line of a maneuver named for a ship that was finally, after 80 years, here to need it. All stations, all stations. Condition anchor is executed. The weather today is Long Lantern. What happened in the next 11 hours, Ren mostly saw in pieces because she spent them working. The forward ring had to empty 1,100 Cicerid and all 34 humans, crossing 5 kilometers of ship through the fracture zone in ordered files, carrying what a life could be reduced to in one journey. The holds part of that was the smallest and the heaviest. 9 generations of human accumulation in the bow ring, and a rule, instantly improvised and instantly iron, of 1 chest per soul. Ren packed the hold book, her grandmother's signal log, and the brass coin, the worn pre-launch coin that had come aboard the Meridian, in her 6 times great-grandmother's pocket, the one every Callaway child had teethed on, the one she had planned her whole life to spend on Earth for bread, to close a circle no one else would ever see. Everything else she looked at once and left. She was carrying the chest to the transit spine when she found Ishen's chair stopped at the great viewport of frame 190, the last wide window before the fracture zone, and Ishin in it, not moving. Her heart did the thing hearts do. Then his eyes opened. Lamplight gone low and amber with age, and found her. Little bird, he said. Look, she looked. The forward viewport was full of Earth. They were deep now, the planet no longer below but ahead. A wall of dawn and sea, and across that wall the shoulder ships were arriving, not as sparks anymore, as shapes. Blunt, heavy, beautiful in the way load-bearing things are beautiful. Sliding into the mesh pattern around the lanterns hurt with the calm of 80 years of rehearsal. As each one took station, it lit its belly lamps amber. Work lights, Dane had said. But in the dark of the lantern's shadow, they looked like a procession of lanterns being carried out to a sickbed. 40 generations, Ishin said. I have heard captains and councils ask the same question of the dark. If the lantern ever fails, who catches the catcher? It was a child's question. There was no answer. We are the biggest thing we know. Beneath us, there has never been anything but the long fall. His old down rippled, and Ren realized he was laughing. The slow geological Cicerid laugh that could outlast weather. And the answer was here the whole time. Growing. The littlest people we ever fished out of the dark went home and built hands big enough to hold us. He reached out and took her wrist in his huge, cool fingers, gently the way he had when she was small enough to sit in the curve of his arm while he named her the old stars. I am glad I did not die before this, Ren. I want you to know that. 300 years, and the sky saved the best wrongness for the end of them. You're not dying, Ren said. You're crossing to the aft ring. The doctors. I am 300 years old, and I am certainly dying, Ishan said comfortably. The only question under negotiation is the view. He patted her wrist once and released it. Go on, you are carrying a library. I will be along. The chair knows the way, she went on. Behind her, the old Cesarid turned his face back to the wall of dawn and the amber lanterns crossing it, and she heard him begin to hum, low, rolling, the birth tone, to a planet he had last seen as a smear of radio noise on the far side of a rescue 238 years before. At hour 9 of 11, with the forward ring empty and the brace half built, Earth asked permission to come aboard again, this time in numbers. Riggers, structures crews, medical teams, 206 humans in working gray, coming up in heavy shuttles to walk the lantern's spine from the inside and fit her for the sling. Othrin granted it without ceremony. The time for ceremony was bleeding away with every thermal cycle. But the Cesarid lined the transitways anyway, all down the kilometers of her, silent, down smooth, watching the children of the people they had once carried come swarming aboard to carry them. And Ren, guiding the lead rigger team through frame 200, watched a woman with 30 years of orbital construction in her hands stop dead at the sight of the fracture, the old crooked weld of it, the 2-century scar, and put her glove flat against the metal the way you'd touch a veteran's wound. This is the one, the rigger said. Not a question. Everyone on Earth, Ren was coming to understand, knew the lantern's medical history better than the whole did. This is where she broke reaching for them. Yes, Ren said. The rigger stood there a moment, glove on the scar. My crew asked me to say something when we got to it, she said. We argued the whole ride-up about what. Everything sounded small. She took her hand away and turned to her team and keyed her suit channel, and what she said went out on the working band, plain, no dialect, no antiquity, an Earth voice talking to Earth hands about an alien ship's broken back. All right, you've seen it. 238 years she's flown on that, because she would not pass by. A breath, nobody passes by, rig her gentle. Let's take the weight. The last argument before the descent was about the flame. It happened at hour 10 in the drive ring, and Ren was summoned to it as voice because it was the kind of argument that needed a third law in the room. At the heart of the long lantern, behind 9 successive shield walls, burned the keel flame. The seeded plasma of her drive core, drawn so the Cesarid taught their children, and Ren had been taught with the rest. From the first fire of the first drift ship their people ever flew, passed from keel to keel for 40 generations like a coal carried across a dark country. It had never gone out. There were Cesarid whose entire family office, parent to child, was the tending of it. Whatever the physics of it had become over the centuries, the truth of it was older than physics. The keel flame was the lantern's life, and the drift's memory, and the only fire of home a shipborne people had. And Earth's descent plan, Gate 3, Line 1, said jettison the drive core over the Argent Deep. It is not negotiable in the engineering, Dane said. He looked sick saying it. He had spent 10 hours learning what the flame meant. The core is a third of her mass and the only part of her we can't sling soft. If we fly it to the basin and anything lets go in the last 10 kilometers, it doesn't matter how soft the water is. We have to drop it in the deep trench dead safe before we commit to the coast. The trench drop is clean, no people, no lanes, 4 kilometers of water. He made himself say the rest. It won't survive. The containment's powered by the core itself. When it drops, it drowns. I'm sorry. I am shipmaster. I am sorrier than the plan has room to say. The keeper of the flame that decade was a Cesarid named Veth, younger than most officers, and Ren watched her stand beside the 9th shield wall, with her down rippling in slow waves of grief, and heard her say the thing that stopped the room. I am not permitted to let it die. The office is older than the ship. Ask me to stay with it. No, said Othrin. Shipmaster, no. The flame is the drift's memory, Othrin said, and the drift's memory does not need a corpse to honor it. It needs witnesses. But Ren heard the fracture under his voice, twin to the one in the spine. He was spending the last of something, and everyone in the ring knew it. 40 generations, he was the shipmaster who would let the fire go out. Ren had not planned to speak. The voices writ ran to the handshake and the book, not to the heart of an alien faith. But she had spent 19 years being the smallest thing on a great ship, which teaches you exactly where the seams are, and she could see one now. Keeper Veth, she said. How is the flame passed? Keel to keel, how? Your people built a new ship. What crossed the gap? A tending lamp, Veth said. A sealed vessel, a cupful of the burn, carried by the keeper's own hands. It sustains a seed of the flame for her down went still as she heard her own answer for 60 days. Then the flame doesn't die in the trench, Ren said. It dies if you have nowhere to set the lamp in 60 days. She turned to Othrin and to the pickup that carried the channel down to Harbor Watch, because this next part was not hers to grant. It was hers to ask, which was the whole of her office, the only thing the voice of the hold had ever been for, asking Earth for things in the family's name. Harbor Watch, Meridian. Query for your engineers, and I need it answered before Gate 3. If a sealed plasma seed came down with us, a cupful of a fire 40 generations old, could Earth keep it burning? 60 days. That's the window. After that we'd need, she looked at the gray giants around her, at the 9th shield wall, at 2.5 centuries of debt running in both directions. We'd need somewhere to put it, a hearth, a keel, anything. The pause on the channel was long enough that Ren's nerve had begun to fray at the edges when Maya Sen came back, and there was something in the controller's voice that had not been there before. Care, taken slowly. The sound of a person who has just been handed something that the manuals did not cover and has decided to cover it herself. Meridian, Harbor Watch. I put your query to the Fusion Directorate. A beat, their answer, verbatim. Tell them we have kept a pilot light burning at Calder Memorial for 81 years, and we are insulted to be asked if we can manage 60 days. Another beat, and the care came all the way through. Bring your fire down, Long Lantern. Earth will hold it as long as holding is needed. That is now also recorded at the planetary level, because I have just recorded it, and they can argue with me after you're down. Veth the Keeper made a sound Ren had never heard Assessor Reed make and left to fetch the tending lamp. They committed to atmosphere at local dawn over the western Argent Sea, and the last 2 hours and 9 minutes of the Long Lantern's 247-year flight were the loudest quiet Ren ever lived through. She wrote it on the command ring, strapped at the signal bench, because the voice rode with the shipmaster, and that was the end of the discussion she'd lost about it. The forward screens carried the brace. 41 shoulder ships meshed around the Lantern 7 kilometers like hands laced under a stretcher, their amber work lamps burning through the plasma sheath as the air of Earth. The air, Ren kept thinking uselessly, the actual air, began to drag at the hull and turn the sky outside from black to violet to a screaming rose gold. Gate 1 passed at 100 kilometers. The spine held, the mesh held. On the open band, pitched under the roar, Earth talked the whole way down. Not commands, those ran on the working channels, but voices, hundreds of them in slow relay reading. It took Ren until Gate 2 to understand what they were reading, because the dialect was her own. The Meridian's original logs, the voices of her dead sent back up to the ship in her last hours, so the Lantern would not fall through a strange sky but through a told one. Day 41, outbound, all well. The children have named the 3rd star to port side. We have decided not to correct them. Day 90, all well. Calloway swears the recycler garden will take tomatoes the betting runs against. Day 200, all well, all well, all well. Who ordered that? She asked Dane, strapped at the bench beside her when she could trust her voice. Nobody, he said. Turnhill started it, and the relays just joined. It's not in any plan. We're a sentimental species, voice, I keep telling you. Nobody believes me until they're inside it. Gate 260 kilometers max heating. The Lantern groaned down her whole length. A sound like a mountain talking in its sleep, and the structures board lit amber in 11 places, and the mesh shifted, breathing, redistributing, 80 years of drill flowing around each new failure faster than the failures could find each other. A shoulder ship called Godwit took a load spike that should have been the spines, and her captain's voice came through the relay flat as glass. Godwit, holding, say again holding, and that, Othrin said later, was when he stopped watching the boards and simply watched the people, because he had crossed the dark for 2.5 centuries and had never once seen 41 ships agree to be one body before. Then, at 52 kilometers between the gates, the spine jumped. It came with no warning the boards could give. A thermal seam deep in the old weld letting go all at once. 11 decks of groan compressed into a single crack that Ren felt in her teeth, and the Long Lantern yawed inside the mesh like a sleeper wrenched by a dream. The structures board went from 11 ambers to 30 in a breath. On the brace plot, 3 shoulder ships slid out of their stations as the load came at them sideways, and the bridge gravity went briefly, sickeningly wrong, and somewhere far aft along the crew net, a sound rose that Ren had never heard from Cicerid throats in her life. The short, sharp call of alarm, hundreds of voices at once, the sound a shipborne people made when the ship itself cried out. Fractures jumped to frame 180, Dane said, flat and fast, dialect gone, Ren translating on top of him almost syllable for syllable. Forward thirds carrying torsion, it doesn't have. Harbor Watch, Lantern, we are Amber 3 on the brace, requesting. Harbor Watch copies, stand by, the mesh is answering, and it was. Ren watched it answer, watched 80 years of drill close over the wound in real time, The three slipped shoulder ships burning back into station not by returning to their old marks but by inventing new ones, the entire lattice of 41 hulls reflowing around the changed load like water finding the new shape of a channel. But the margin display in the corner of Dane's board, the one number he had never once let her watch him watch, had gone from comfortable to thin, and the abort clock to gate 3 stood at 4 minutes. That was when the internal sling team called the ring. There were 6 of them still aboard the Spine by design. The rigger crew chief and 5 of hers, riding the descent inside the fracture zone in hardened rescue rigs, because the internal tension lines that helped the old weld carry itself needed living hands within reach if anything shifted. Everything had shifted. The chief's voice came up the net calm as a level. 2 of her tension anchors had torn free at the jump, the lines were slack, and slack lines through Gate 3's deceleration would let the new fracture work itself open like a pried seam. They could re-anchor. It needed 9 minutes. The abort clock said 4. Then we abort, Dane said. We go around. Gate 3 holds another window in. Negative on the go-around from structures, Maya Sen cut in, and for the first time in the entire descent, Earth's voice carried the weight of a door closing. The jump cost us the margin, Lantern. The Spine has 1 more deceleration in her, exactly 1, and a go-around spends it on nothing. If we don't take Gate 3 on this pass, we don't get Gate 3. A half second, no more. Options on my deck say, drop the core on schedule with slack lines and accept the seam working open, survivable, barely, the basin soft. Or hold the descent profile shallow for 9 minutes while the riggers re-anchor, which puts our Gate 3 drop point past the trench, and the core goes down on the continental shelf instead. Shallow water, dead reefs and a decade of cleanup, and the directorate will take that trade, and I am required to say out loud that they hate it. 2 costs on the table, and 4 minutes, and every face on the command ring, gray and human, turned. Ren realized with a feeling like the deck dropping away. Not to her, and not to Earth. To Othrin. The 40th shipmaster of the Long Lantern looked at the plot for the length of one long Cesarid breath, and then he said, in the trade tongue, in his clear sky voice, the voice the whole ship steered by, neither. Chief of Riggers, you have 6 hands and 9 minutes of work. I am sending you 200 more hands and you will do it in 3. Watch officer. Open frames 170 through 210. Crew of the Lantern. And here his voice went out on the all-ship net, kilometers of it, rings and gardens and holds, children of the drift. The ship that carried us for 40 generations asked to be carried for 3 minutes. Every soul within 5 frames of the Spine, go now, and put your hands where the small ones tell you. Ren spent the next 180 seconds translating rigging instructions into Cesaride, faster than she had ever spoken any language in her life. Anchor here, haul on this mark, hold, while the net filled with a deep working drone of hundreds of gray giants packing the fracture zone, taking the slack tension lines in their great hands in teams of 40, becoming for 180 seconds, the missing strength of their own ships broken back. The chief of riggers reset her anchors between their braced bodies with surgical calm, swearing in 2 centuries of dialect. The abort clock went to 0 and Maya Sen's voice said very quietly, Gate 3 is yours, Lantern, on my mark, and the margin number in the corner of Dane's board climbed 1 decimal place, which on that board, that day, was the width of the whole sky. Your ancestors broke this Spine reaching for mine, Ren said to the net, to all of them, in both her languages, because the voice's whole office was saying the thing out loud. Mark it down, theirs held it up. Gate 340 kilometers, over the trench, dead on the original line, riggers clear, line singing taut, the core drop. Veth had done her work. The tending lamp rode aft with the medical convoy, a cupful of 40 generations sealed in a vessel the size of a child. What remained behind the 9th shield wall was the great fire itself, and at Gate 3, with the basin's coast a pale line on the far screens, Othrin gave the only order of the descent that Earth had left wholly to him. He gave it in his own tongue, unhurried, while the sky burned rose gold around his ship. Keel flame of the Long Lantern, he said. You have carried us far enough. Down tools, rest. The Lantern dropped her heart into the sea from 40 kilometers, and Ren watched it go on the aft screens. The drive ring separating clean, falling away trailing fire like a small setting sun, and the whole crew net of the ship, every Cesaride aboard on every deck, holding one unbroken rolling tone as it fell. Not the birth tone, the other one. She had heard it twice in her life at the garden ring, over the old ones who had finished. The core hit the Argent deep in a tower of white water visible from the command ring, and went down, and went dark, and the Long Lantern, lighter by a third, crooked, slung in 41 pairs of hands, flew on toward the coast of the Earth with her fire out and her people singing. It was somewhere in that long minute that Ren looked across the ring and saw Ishin's chair at the observer rail, where he had absolutely no clearance to be, and saw that Ishin was not singing. He was watching the coast. The basin was rising over the curve of the world to meet them. The catchwater, 30 kilometers of deliberate gentleness, dawn silver, ringed with the lights of the receiving city and line the far feeds showed, with more human beings than had been alive on the whole planet when the Meridian launched. They had been gathering for 2 days. The registry had stopped trying to count at 40 million and politely turned the counters off. The old Cesarid's eyes were full of the silver of it. His down lay smooth and still, perfectly calm, and one huge cool hand was open on his knee, palm up, the way he used to leave it open on the arm of his chair when Ren was 4, so that she could fall asleep holding 2 of his fingers. Strapped at the bench, 11 meters and a law of physics away, Ren understood with total clarity that Ishin had chosen his view, exactly as he'd said, that he had 300 years behind him and a coastline ahead of him, and that he was finishing. Ishin, she said. The roar ate it. She said it again into the crew net. Ishin. His lamplight eyes came around her, amber, unhurried, and he smiled the way Cesarid smile, which is not with the mouth at all. Little bird, he said, on the net, under the voices of her ancestors reading all well, sing the one your grandmother's grandmother taught me, so she sang it. Strapped into the bench of a falling ship, on an open channel, in front of the shipmaster and the pilot, and 41 straining hulls and 40 million people on a silver shore and every soul in between, Ren Calloway sang the song the Meridian's crew had sung in their broken hull 238 years ago so that the children would be less afraid. The small human song that had broken a great ship's back across 100 trillion kilometers of dark, because the people who heard it could not be the kind who passed by. Her voice cracked on the third line. Aboard the brace, in a dozen cockpits, Earth pilots who had learned the old tapes by heart picked the line up and carried it with her, and the song came down out of the sky on 42 ships at once. Ishin listened with his face to the coast, his hand open on his knee, his down smooth as dawn water. Gate 4 passed. The catchwater took the long lantern the way the plan had promised and the way nothing in 247 years had earned. A kilometer long blade of silver spray, a groan of old bones settling into soft-dredged ground, a deceleration that arrived not as violence but as a long, slowing exhale, and the loudest sound in the world turned out to be the silence after, broken by Myasin's voice, raw, formal, going out planet-wide at the bottom of an 80-year drill. All stations harbor watch. The long lantern is down. The long lantern is safe. Souls aboard 412, souls lost. A pause while the medical net spoke into her ear. Ren was already out of her straps, across the ring, at the chair by the observer rail. The great cool hand was still warm when she took 2 of its fingers, the way she had at 4 years old. But the lamplight eyes had gone out somewhere in the last kilometer of the long fall, with the coast of Earth full in them, and the song still on the net, and 300 years of dark crossed all the way to the bright silver edge of done. Souls lost. 1. Myasin finished very quietly. Stand easy, all stations. He saw the water. The long lantern lay still in the catchwater, crooked and emptied and saved, steam rising off her 7 kilometers into the morning of the Earth. And that was how the longest voyage in the history of 2 species ended. With the ship caught, the fire carried, the people whole, and the oldest soul aboard gone home by 1 window over everyone else. At dawn, over the basin built 81 years too early, under a sky that had kept the light on. They opened the main locks an hour later, when the hull had cooled and the floating causeways had walked themselves out from the shore, and Earth, with a tact that Ren would not fully understand until she had lived on it a while, did not cheer. 40 million people stood along the rim of the catchwater behind a courtesy line no one had drawn, in a silence no one had ordered, because the registry had passed 1 sentence down the shore in the night. They have a death aboard, and a long road behind them, and 40 million people had decided individually and unanimously that the first sound the returners heard on Earth should not be a roar. Drums and bells and bands stood down, holding, the whole morning held. So what Ren Calloway heard when she came down the causeway at her father's side carrying the hold book against her chest. The first of the line, ashore, by a vote the hold had held in the transit spine and refused to let her decline. What she heard with her boot an inch off the ground was no sound at all but the wind and the water, and somewhere far down the shore a single gull, exactly as advertised on page 9. And then her boot came down on the soil of the Earth, the first Calloway footfall in 247 years, and from 40 million people there rose, soft oceanic, swelling mile by mile down the curve of the basin like weather arriving. Not a cheer, but a murmur, the sound of 2 million small voices at a time saying some version of "there she is" to the people beside them, and Ren stood on her ancestors' planet in her ship-made boots and burst into tears. The ground did not move. That was the thing nobody had warned her about. 19 years of deck plate under her, always faintly alive, always humming with the keel. And now this stillness that went down, her bones reported, Forever. She stood weeping on 6,000 kilometers of stillness while her family came down the causeway behind her, 14, and then 20, and then all 33, and behind them the Cesserid, ducking out of the lock one great gray figure at a time, unfolding into open planetary air that not one of them in 40 generations had ever breathed. Looking up, every single one of them, Othrin first, looked up into a blue and bottomless sky with no hull in it anywhere, and stopped and stood, the way you stand at the edge of a thing your language has no floor for. "It does not end," said Veth the Keeper, very softly. The tending lamp in her arms, her face turned all the way up. "Voice, your sky, it does not end." "No," Ren said. Her own face was up too. The vertigo was mutual, it turned out, hull-born human and ship-born Cesserid alike, all of them clinging to the same new planet by the soles of their feet. "It doesn't." It was Dane who caught her when the sky finally tipped her over, a hand under her elbow, unhurried, as if returners folding up on the causeway was a documented stage of the procedure, which, she learned later, it was. The registry manual called it groundfall, and the staff posted along the causeway were there for exactly that. "Easy," he said. "You're allowed to sit down on your own planet. Most do." "I'm not sitting down," Ren said, sitting down. The soil of the Catchwater shore was engineered, dredged, 81 years deliberate, and under her hands it was still soil, damp and cold and gritty and indifferent, and it smelled exactly the way the book said rain smelled, which made no sense because the sky was clear. She said so. Dane crouched beside her on the shore of the morning and explained, in his museum glass dialect, that the smell had a name, that it was the smell of ground that had been rained on lately, and was thinking about it, that the word was older than spaceflight. "The book has the word," Ren said. "Page 9, I thought you needed the rain first." "It rains tonight if the loom keeps the schedule," Dane said. "First one's free. After that you'll complain about it like the rest of us." He looked out at the silver water, at the 7 steaming kilometers of saved ship, and Ren watched the pilot's composure finally finish the long collapse it had been negotiating since. The boat bay. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes. "Once hard, 80 years," he said. "People gave their whole careers to a drill everyone called the saddest exercise in the service. There are riggers who trained their entire lives for yesterday and died before it. And it worked. It all." He stopped and laughed, wet and amazed at the sky. "It worked, and on the actual day, the actual long lantern came down singing." Behind them, up the causeway, the Cesserid were carrying Ishan ashore. They carried him on a garden litter, woven from the green of the ring he had tended for 2 centuries, and the question of what to do with him came ashore with the body and sat down in the middle of everything, patient as he had been. The Cesserid rite was simple and impossible. A finished soul was given to weather. On a drift ship that meant the garden ring cycle, breath and leaf and soil, the closed sky of the hull. Under an open sky it meant no one knew. No Cesserid had finished under an open sky in 40 generations. Veth held the tending lamp and looked at the bottomless blue and said the rite did not have a floor here either, and Othrin stood over the litter a long time, his down moving in slow weather, and then turned to Ren and asked his second impossible question of the voyage. "He learned your family's song," Othrin said. "He kept your family's debt. Voice, where does your book bury the ones who belong to 2 homes?" Ren looked down at Ishan's still gray face. And the answer was already there, the way the pilotage had been, the way the lamp had been. Page after page of the book standing up inside her when the living needed it, which, she was beginning to understand, was the entire reason 9 generations had carried the thing. "On the hill," she said, "where the road ends. We take him with us to Turn Hill, and we give him to the weather there, the real weather, the first weather any of us was ever promised. He waited 300 years for a sky. He can have the one with the light in it." Othrin's down went smooth. "Then the carry has 1 more passenger," he said. "Let us finish it properly." The journey to Turn Hill began 2 days later, and Earth asked for transport, did a thing that Ren had stopped being surprised by and would never stop being moved by. It asked the hold what the book said, and then it matched the page. The book said, "From the Catchwater's coast, the old launch country lay 1,900 kilometers south and east, and in her 6 times great-grandmother's day you crossed it by rail. So Earth sent a train. Not a museum piece, a working long-line sleeper, quiet as falling snow that rode a guideway 40 meters over the land on pylons, spaced like heartbeat, but they routed it low and slow on purpose, a full day and a night and a day, because the registry's returner manual, page 1, paragraph 1, said the worst thing you could do to people coming home after a long way out was to make the last leg instant. Arrival, the manual said, is a speed. The party that boarded was 33 humans, 11 Cesserid, 1 litter, 1 lamp, and 1 pilot who had flatly refused to be reassigned. And the train pulled out of the receiving city through a crowd that had learned about the death and stood all along the first kilometers of guideway holding lights, handheld, old-fashioned, Amber, without a single sign or shout among them, 40 deep for 11 minutes of slow rolling silence. Your planet keeps doing this, Ren said to Dane at the window. Doing what? Knowing what not to say. He considered the lights going by. We had a long time to think about what we'd say, he said. Everyone my whole life has played the game, you know the one. What do you say if the Meridian ever comes home? Everyone's got an answer. There are whole anthologies. It was a graduation essay prompt for about a century. He nodded at the window. Turns out when it actually happens, everybody looks at their essay and puts it down and just brings a light. The land unrolled. Ren had budgeted, with the discipline of a person raised on ration cycles, 1 hour of window watching before she made herself useful. She missed the mark by the width of a continent. The book's geography was in her bones. She had drawn the old maps freehand at 8, could recite the river cities in order. And the land outside agreed with none of it, and somehow kept faith with all of it. The rivers had moved. The book's drowned coastlines were dry and terraced and green. The cities stood where the maps said, but had grown up instead of out, slender towers wound with gardens. And between them the country had gone back to grass and forest, crossed by the pylon stride of the guideways. Herds moving under the train in numbers that made her press both hands to the glass, Bison Dane said, and later, unbelievably, the gray sea shapes of whales off a headland. Because page 9's gulls had been the start of a list her ancestors thought they were writing in past tense, and Earth had spent 2 centuries turning the list back to present. The book says there were 11,000 of the big whales left, she said. It says sorry to them. There's a whole page that's just an apology. To the whales, 190,000 last season, Dane said. The apology got accepted, more or less. There's a treaty. It's complicated. They have lawyers now. Well, we're their lawyers. It's a working arrangement. Twice in the first 100 kilometers, the comedy of her education ambushed them both. At the galley car, she tried to pay for bread with the brass coin, drew it from her pocket and set it on the counter with 2.5 centuries of family intention behind the gesture, the circle her whole line had waited to close, and the galley steward, a round, soft-faced woman who had been beaming at the returners since they boarded, looked at the coin of a nation that no longer existed, and the human who should not exist offering it, and her face went through 6 kinds of weather before she managed gently that there hadn't been money for bread in a long time. Bread on Earth had gone the way of the corridor and the basin and the light. It was kept because someone might need it. Then what do I? Ren looked at the coin, suddenly and horribly adrift. The transaction had been load-bearing. She had rehearsed the smallness of it her entire life, the dream of being an ordinary customer on an ordinary morning on her own planet. The book says you pay for bread. It's the first thing you do. It's in the homecoming pages. My grandmother. The steward came around the counter, took the coin, examined it with terrible care, and put it back in Ren's hand, closing the young fingers over it with both of her own. Tell you what, she said, that's clearly good money. Anyone can see that. But it's too much for 1 loaf, and I can't make change for a coin like that, because there isn't change for a coin like that on this whole world. So you'll have to run a tab. She held Ren's hand a moment longer. Come back every morning until it's even. It became in the following days the single most repeated story of the homecoming on all of Earth, and the steward had to be formally rescued from her own fame by the registry. But on the train, in the moment, it was just the 2 of them and the bread, and Ren ran the first morning of her tab with the coin warm in her pocket, unspent and finally spendable, which her grandmother would have understood completely, and which she could not have explained to a soul. The second ambush was the rain. It came at dusk on schedule, the loom walking a soft gray shower across the grasslands ahead of the train, and Ren, who had stood at viewports through coronal storms that could cook a city, who had ridden a breaking ship through an atmosphere on 41 hulls, saw water begin to streak the window glass and heard on the roof the small, numberless drumming of the thing the book loved most, the thing her dead had missed aloud on more pages than they had missed any human invention, and she stood up so fast her chair fell and could not say anything at all. The train, it materialized afterward, had a returner protocol for this too. It found a reason to stop. Some inspection, some scheduled pause, announced in a murmur. The doors opened onto the smell that had been waiting in the soil since before the species left it, and 33 humans of the hold walked out into the falling evening rain of Earth and stood in it, faces up, while it soaked them to the skin. Nobody performed anything. Her father held his palms out flat and watched them fill, shaking his head slowly, like a man checking a figure that refused to be wrong. Her smallest cousin, 4 years old, hid from the sky under a seat and had to be coaxed out and then could not be coaxed back in. And the 11 Cesserid came out last, ducking, unfolding, and let the first open sky water in 40 generations fall on the gray down their whole species had grown, in the deep of time, on a world of weather they had long ago stopped being able to name, and stood in the rain with the humans they had carried, very tall, very quiet, while the litter of their dead rode dry and patient in the car behind, one window over from everyone, the way he liked. Veth turned her face out of the rain, found Ren, and made the low rolling tone, and Ren realized the keeper had aimed it at the lamp riding in the litter car. A birth tone at a funeral train in the rain. For the flame? Ren asked. For all of it, little voice, Veth said. We have a saying. The drift's children are born indoors and die indoors, and between is the long room. I am standing outside the room. I am 300 years younger than Ishan, and I got here, and he taught me the way. Water beaded and ran on her. Down in silver lines. He would be unbearable about this. He would say he told us so. He did, you know, for 200 years. They will be more than they were, the small ones compound. We thought it was age talking. She looked up into the falling gray. It was arithmetic. Deep in that night, somewhere over the dark middle of the continent, Ren woke in her bunk to the sense of a signal and found Dane in the observation car, alone, with a handheld set patched into the train's antenna and the volume turned to a thread. Couldn't sleep either, he said, and then, catching her expression as she heard what the set was playing, I should have shown you this days ago. I was saving it. Sit. It was a voice, a woman's unhurried, reading what was unmistakably a letter, and under it, just audible, a carrier tone Ren's trained ear placed instantly as deep array uplink, an Earth signal aimed out. And your niece took her certification this spring, which makes 4 pilots in the family now, so the argument about whose fault that is continues. The garden came through the storms. We are all well. We are all still here. End of tonight's with love, a chime. Another voice took the channel, a man's, older, in a different accent, beginning another letter. The Quiet Post, Dane said, volunteer service. Runs all night, every night, on 11 channels at once. He turned the set so she could see the display. 11 names. Brightwater Run, Halcyon, far reply. 8 more she did not know yet and would soon, the way she knew her own dead. The 11 hulls still unanswered. Everyone has a corridor held, like yours did, and every night Earth reads to them. News, letters from the descendants, ballgame scores. The Halcyon's channel gets poetry. Her captain was known for it. The arrays throw it out along their last known headings at full power forever. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Almost certainly no one's hearing it. Everyone knows the odds. The Post publishes them every year, honestly, right on the recruitment page, and every year there's a waiting list for reading slots anyway. 11,000 people deep, last cycle. Ren listened to the old man read a stranger's letter to a ship 91 years gone, his voice as matter-of-fact and warm as if the silence on the far end were just a relative who never wrote back. You did this for us, she said. All those years. The watch books, the corridor, this. We were Channel 12. You were Channel 1, Dane said. The Meridian's the reason the Post exists. The first volunteer started reading to your people 11 days after contact was lost, and nobody's missed a night since. He looked at her sideways. 247 years of one-way letters, voice. They're all archived at Turn Hill. Every word anyone ever sent you. I'd budget some time. Ren sat in the dark observation car of a train crossing her ancestors' continent, listening to her species talk patiently into the void on 11 channels at once, and understood that she had been wrong on the bridge at the very beginning when the beacon answered in 4/10 of a second and she had thought, Earth never forgot us. Forgetting had never once been the danger. You do not build the Quiet Post or mow an empty basin for 80 years or staff a lamp room for 2.5 centuries against forgetting. You build them because you remember, and remembering, for the people her people came from, had never been a feeling. It was a job. You showed up for it nightly. It had a roster and a waiting list. Can anyone take a reading slot, she asked. Dane handed her the set. She read to the Brightwater Run that night. The Hold Book, page 9, the gulls and the whales and the rain. And her voice went out over the dark of the continent and off the edge of the night side of the earth, headed for a silence 91 years deep at the speed of light on the chance, on the bare and unembarrassed chance, that somebody out there was still keeping a book of their own. They came into the launch country on the second morning, and Ren learned what Earth had done with the place her people left from. The book's final photographs showed Turn Hill as her ancestors knew it, a green coastal rise above a working spaceport, gantries on the flats, the pad, the squat lighthouse-built beacon on the crown of the hill that some launch-age romantic had insisted on building in the old shore style, stone and lamp room, because her 6x great-grandmother had recorded the architect's words, ships are ships. Around it in the pictures sprawled the ordinary sheds and lots and perimeter fences of a hard-used field. What rose off the plain outside the train window was a city of launch. The Anchor Line, Dane called it, the planet's oldest working port. Gantries in ranks marching to the horizon, hulls going up the morning sky on pillars of clean white fire with the unhurried regularity of a tide, and at the heart of it, untouched in a ring of green like the still center of a turning wheel, the hill. The old pad kept. The original gantry, painted and sound, 290 years old, the most carefully maintained industrial antique on the planet. And on the crown, above it all, the light. It's lit, Wren said. The lamp room was burning, pale, steady, daylight defeating, visible across 40 kilometers of the busiest port on Earth. It's daytime. Why is it? It's always lit, Dane said. That's the whole of it. That's the entire job. He was looking at the hill, with the particular stillness of a man seeing his own watch year from the outside. Every light on this coast went automatic 2 centuries ago. Turnhill never did. There's a human in that lamp room right now, and there has been every hour of every day since the morning your ship lifted. The registry rotates the watch through the pilot service. A year, usually when you're young, you sit the hill, you keep the log. You maintain the handshake by hand to the old standard because the old standard is what the Meridian's receivers could hear and the watch officer's standing order. The first line of the watch book, never amended, is that the light answers inside half a second at any hour of any year. Machines could have done it cheaper. That was never the point. He paused. 19 months ago, the point walked into my watch room at 3 in the morning. 4/10 of a second after I'd answered a handshake I had drilled 5,000 times and never once heard arrive. Wren turned from the window. It was you, on the hill, the night I called. It was me, Dane said. You said the field is dry. And I had the answer out of my mouth before my heart finished its next beat. Because the watch trains you past thinking, and then I sat there at the oldest desk on Earth, shaking, looking at a return signature 247 years overdue, thinking the watch book has a page for this. Page 1. We never turned past page 1. He smiled and it went all the way down. Then I rang every bell on the hill. They heard them in the port. Furthest the bells have carried since they were cast. The train slid into the anchor line through corridors of paused work. Crews on the gantry. Catwalks standing to face the guideway as the cars passed, hard-hatted, motionless, hands at their sides in what Wren now recognized as Earth's whole grammar of honor. Presence and quiet, and stopped at the foot of the hill, at a small stone platform that the schedule boards of the planet's busiest port listed, and had listed for 247 years, with one word and no departure time, Meridian. Her father read the platform sign and wept. The hold came off the train into the sea wind their dead had described on 40 separate pages, and Wren stood on the stone with the book in her arms at the bottom of the green hill of Turnhill, at the end of the oldest road her species had, and looked up at the light her grandmother had promised her was real, and began to climb. The path up Turnhill was switchbacked and worn, stone steps 290 years old with their middles dished by boots, and the registry had emptied it for them. The only people on the hill that morning were the returners, the litter bearers, the pilot, and, waiting at the lamp room door at the top, in the high wind, in a plain gray watch coat, the keeper of the light. She was younger than Wren had expected. They were all younger than the book had taught her to expect. Earth had stopped letting its people wear out. The keeper's name was Asha Ndiaye, 23 8 months into her watch year, and she had been on the hill alone the night before last when the port below had erupted into bells and siren song at the news of the catch, and she had kept the log through all of it in the watchbook's required steady hand. And she showed Wren the entry now, because the protocol, the real protocol, the one her family and this hill had kept between them across the dark, said the voice closed the loop in the lamp room, in person, in writing, or the loop was not closed. The lamp room was circular and small and smelled of stone, brass, and the sea. The light itself stood in the center, the original first launch-age array, rebuilt piece by piece for 2 centuries the way you rebuild a thing you will not allow to become a different thing, burning its steady half-second ready burn. Around the walls ran the desk, the handshake equipment in its mirror-bright antique racks, and the shelf, one long shelf, bowed in the middle, holding 247 identical leather-bound volumes. The watchbooks, Ashia said, one a year. Every hour of everyone is signed. She took down the first volume, opened it to the first page, and stood aside. The first line of the first watchbook of Turnhill Light, written 247 years ago, 6 hours after the Meridian's launch, in a hand Wren knew from the whole book's earliest pages the way she knew her own. Watch established. One ship out. The light answers inside the half-second at any hour of any year, until she is home or her people are. There is no third condition. T. Okafor, first keeper. Wren read the name twice. Then she turned and looked at Dane, who was standing very straight by the door with the wind still in his collar, looking at nothing in particular. Okafor, she said. 11th generation, he said. We're not all keepers. The watch passes through everyone's hands. That's the point of it. But we've never once been off the rotation. My family stayed on the hill, voice. Yours went out. Somebody waves the boat off, somebody brings it in. He cleared his throat. First Keeper Tendai Okafor was the Meridian's launch director. He retired the day she lifted and took the watch the same evening. Said he'd lit the fuse so he'd mind the lamp. A small, crooked, devastating smile. 247 years, and the night the handshake finally came in, the duty officer was an Okafor. The registry ran the odds of that. They're long. Nobody on this planet believes their chance, and nobody can prove they are, and we have all decided planetarily not to look into it further. Ren laughed and discovered halfway through the laugh that it had become the other thing, and stood in the lamp room of Turnhill Light, with her hand over her mouth while 2.5 centuries closed over her head like the sea. Then she did her office, the last duty of the voice of the hold, the one her grandmother had drilled her for on a deck 40 trillion kilometers away, against odds that had never once been kind. She set the hold book on the keeper's desk beside the current watch book, the two halves of one record, separated by the width of the dark, kept by two families who had never stopped writing to each other without a single word arriving, and she opened to the final page and took up the pen Asha offered and wrote, while the light burned steady at her back. Meridian reports. Out 247 years. Home by the corridor kept for us on the strength of strangers in the hands of the long lantern, to whom the line owes all that it is. Crew of the line, 33 souls ashore with their children and their dead all written. One passenger, Ishan of the long lantern, 300 years, who heard us singing and did not pass by, delivered to the weather of this hill, which was promised to him in stories before any of us was born. The field was dry, the light was green, the loop is closed. W. Calloway. Voice of the hold, on Turnhill. Ashandaya read it, countersigned it in the watchbook with a steady required hand, dated it, and then, being 23 and 8 months alone on a hill, and present at the end of the longest watch her species had ever stood, put her forehead down on the desk between the two books and cried, and Ren put a hand on her shoulder and looked out the lamp room glass at the wind moving on the green hill and let her. They gave Ishan to the weather that evening on the seaward slope in the long gold light. The whole hold came up, and the 11 Cessarid, and, by a petition that had gathered 400,000 signatures in a day, and which Othrin, asked for leave, had granted with one sentence. He spent 3 centuries learning to love a crowd he never met. Let them come. The lower slopes and the port below filled, quiet as the Catchwater shore, with more of earth than Ren could see the edges of. The Cessarid right under an open sky turned out in the end to need no inventing. Veth spoke the old words, that a finished soul is lent to the weather, and the weather is lent to everyone, so that to breathe anywhere, ever after, is to borrow a little of the dead. They burned the garden litter on a bed of stone with the flame. This was Veth's amendment, and she made it with the tending lamp in her hands and her down perfectly smooth, taken from the Keelfire's own seed, so that the last thing the old flame of the drift did before its keeping pass to earth was carry Ishan out. The smoke went up off Turnhill, and the sea wind took it, and the wind was the earth's, and the earth's wind goes everywhere eventually. Ren sang the song once more, alone this time, by request, his as it turned out. He had left instructions with Veth, dated 2 years before the lantern reached Saul, in the serene certainty of a being who had decided the arithmetic would hold. When we arrive, and I finish, the little bird sings it on the hill, and no one helps her, because by then she will not need helping. He was right. Her voice held. It had broken on a falling ship, and it held on the steady hill. And afterward she understood that too had been a lesson he had set up centuries in advance, because teaching was the only way Ishan had ever consented to die. When the fire had gone to embers and the crowd to light lights in the dusk, Othrin came and stood beside her at the edge of the burnstone, and they watched the first stars come up over the port. Real stars, weather-blurred, rising and setting, behaving in ways no star had ever behaved through a viewport. The carry is paid, he said. 247 years and one hill, and it is paid. His down moved once, a long slow ripple, the Cessarid sigh. I have been shipmaster for 60 years and I no longer have a ship. She will not lift again. Your harbor people were honest about that from the first hour. The lantern flew her last flight into their basin. I find he paused, examining the inside of his own weather. I find I cannot grieve her the way the law expects. She did not break in the dark. She is lying in warm water full of engineers who speak to her hull as though she were a grandmother. There are worse ends for a long road. I have seen most of them. And the crew? Ren asked. The people, the 377 souls, shipmaster. Where does the drift go from here? That, Othrin said, is the question Earth has asked me 4 times in 2 days, with increasing gentleness and increasingly alarming sketches, and before Ren could ask what that meant, the answer came up the hill to find them. It came in the form of Maya Sen, Controller Sen, off shift, in civilian clothes, slighter and younger in person than her voice, with a registry case under one arm and an expression balanced between awe and agenda, and behind her 2 engineers of the Fusion Directorate, and behind them, hanging back at the respectful distance Earth seemed to issue at birth, Asha and Dane. They had come, Maya said, because the Planetary Assembly had voted that afternoon, and someone had to tell the shipmaster before the bells did, and the registry had decided the someone should be the voice he already knew. 3 things, sir, she said, and held up fingers human fashion, and then, catching herself, made the small Caesarid open palm gesture instead, which she had learned in 2 days, because of course she had. First, the long lantern. Earth requests that she stay where she lies, permanently, not as wreckage and not as a relic. The engineering survey says her rings will hold air and turn for another 1,000 years if she's tended. The catchwater can be made fresh or salt or sky roof to her people's need, and the assembly has voted, unanimous with weeping, which is a procedural category we invented this afternoon, that the basin and everything in it is ceded in perpetuity to the people of the drift. She carried a world for 2 centuries, sir. Earth proposes that she simply go on being one, a harbor world now, at anchor, the first Caesarid ground that has ever existed. Your people would hold her as their own soil. 40 million people watched her come down and would like permission to love her. And I am quoting the Assembly resolution because I helped draft it at 4 in the morning and I stand by every word. Wren translated, though by then she suspected Othrin needed it only half the time. The shipmaster stood very still. And the second thing, he said, the second thing. Maya opened the registry case. Inside, on gray cloth, lay a drafting plate, an engineer's plate dense with structure, and Wren saw Othrin's down rise all along his arms as he understood it 1 full second before the words. The Fusion Directorate begs to report that the keel flame of the Long Lantern is burning at Turn Hill as of tonight in temporary keeping, per the agreement logged at the planetary level. The Directorate further begs to advise that temporary has a defined end. She turned the plate toward him. Earth proposes to lay a keel. A drift ship, sir, a true one, built in the anchor line yards to your people's lines and your people's law, by your shipwrights and ours together, with every scar of the Lantern's lessons designed out, and every kindness of her designed in. Hull number 1 of a class we'd like your leave to name Ishan. Estimated build, 11 years. And when she's whole, the flame goes aboard from this hill, keel to keel by tending lamp, the way it has always gone. 1 generation of fire to the next. The carry came in. Earth would like leave to send one out. Othrin looked at the plate for a long time. The wind moved on the hill, carrying its new freight. We came to repay 60 lives, he said at last, and to ask leave to go and search the dark for what remains of our own drift, for the kin we left when we turned aside for you. We expected to spend a century searching. The dark is wide, and our people drift far. His lamplight eyes came up. You are offering us a ground, a ship, and a fire. What do you ask? That's the third thing, Maya said. We ask the thing the registry always asks. She nodded down the dusk blue slope, at the lamp room standing steady above the embers and the sea. The light stays lit until everyone's home, yours too now. Give the registry your drift's old signal codes, the calls your kin would answer, and Earth will put them on the watch. Every deep array we own, every listening post from here to the far stations, every hour of every year. 11 of our own hulls are still out there unanswered. We've kept their corridors for decades. We know how to wait. We are, sir, on the record the best in the galaxy at it. She closed the case. Let us wait with you. That's the price. There isn't another one. Wren finished translating and stood in the wind with her family's planet under her feet and watched the 40th shipmaster of the Long Lantern, who had crossed 2.5 centuries of dark on a promise and arrived expecting to deliver an apology to a struggling world, bow his head over a drafting plate on a green hill the way you bow at a birth. Ishan, Othrin said. The class is well named. He always said you would compound. He laid one great gray hand flat on the plate. The Caesarid, yes, lay the keel. The keel of the Ishan was laid in the anchor line yards on the 90th day after the catch, and by then the shape of the new world had begun to settle over all of them, gently and unevenly, the way snow settles on country it has never seen. The Lantern became a town. It happened faster than the engineers predicted and slower than the children wanted. The catchwater locked fresh, the rings opened one by one as the surveys cleared them, and the Caesarid moved back aboard their own soil now in law and in fact, the first their species had held in 40 generations. While around the basin's rim, a human shore city grew up to face her unplanned, unstoppable, built mostly of people who had come for the catch and never quite managed to leave. The 2 populations leaked into each other immediately. Caesarid walked the shore markets at dawn, very tall among the bread stalls, running tabs. Human school groups crossed the causeways to the garden ring, where the bean rose wren had grown up weeding became, By her father's decree as holdmaster, a working classroom, touch everything, his one rule posted in 2 scripts. Gardens are not museums. Veth kept a hearth in the old drive ring where the keel flame's seed had burned, cold now swept and not sad. 100 sesarid a day came to stand in the quiet of it, and then walked out into weather, which was where the flame had gone. The hold itself dissolved, formally, in the 40th day session of its own council, by unanimous vote of all 33. There had never been a plan for after. The hold had been a way of carrying something, and the carrying was done. Her father wept through the whole proceeding and called it the proudest meeting of his life. The family scattered the way roots scatter, which is to say not far and not apart. A cluster by the catchwater, 2 cousins to the whale lawyers, her Aunt Senna, the Lantern's best human engineer, straight into the Ishan's design halls, where within a month the Cesarid shipwrights had given her the title they reserved for people who argued with them correctly. And Rin found, in the weeks after the hill, that she alone had come ashore without anywhere to put herself down. It was not unhappiness. She kept waiting for unhappiness, monitoring herself with ration cycle discipline, and it never came. What came instead was a low signal she could not tune out, a sense of standing in a doorway after the door has been opened for you, at the exact center of the 2 largest families in the world, belonging to both, settled in neither. The voice of the hold had been her whole shape. The office had ended on a desk in a lamp room, completed perfectly, and a completed purpose, it turned out, leaves the same hole as a broken one, just with cleaner edges. She went back to Turn Hill in the 6th week, alone on the slow train, to visit the burnstone and the 2 books, and that was where Asha Ndiaye found her at sundown, sitting on the dished stone steps below the lamp room with the sea wind in her face, watching the port's white fire pillars climb the dusk. The keeper sat down next to her without asking, in the way of people who spend a year alone on hills, and for a while they watched the launches together. "You know what nobody tells you about this watch," Asha said eventually. "Everyone thinks it's about the past. 247 books, the old desk, the old dialect. People come up here and stand in the lamp room like it's a memory. It was never a memory. Every single night of every single one of those years, this was the most forward-looking room on the planet. The whole job is one bet, renewed hourly. Someone is still out there, and tonight might be the night. You can't stand that watch facing backward. It only works leaning out." She tipped her head at the dark coming up over the sea. 11 hulls voice, 11 corridors still held. The Brightwater run, 91 years gone, 40 souls. The Halcyon. The far reply, "There's a name. Her keeper's log will break your heart." They named the ship for the thing they were promising to send back. And as of this season, one entire drift of your gray giant's kin, signal codes loaded, every array listening. She paused. "My year ends in 4 months. The registry asks each keeper to name candidates for the next watch. It's the oldest privilege of the post." The sea wind worked at the grass. Below them, the port breathed fire and thunder, politely at the stars. "You're allowed to say no," Asha added. "Nobody has ever once said no." Ren looked at her hands, ship-made hands on a stone step, 19 years of deck plate behind them and a planet's worth of stillness beneath, felt the low signal she had carried for 6 weeks resolve all at once into a heading. "Why me?" she said. It was not a protest. She wanted it on the record. She was her grandmother's archivist to the marrow. "Because the watch's whole art is believing the dark will answer," Asha said. "And you're the only person alive it has ever answered for. Every keeper for 2 centuries stood up there on faith." She smiled. "You'd be the first one standing on evidence." The registry's examiners put Ren through 8 months of training. Pilotage theory, deep RA protocol, the dead dialects of all 11 lost hulls, and a final practicum that consisted of being left alone in a simulator while recorded handshakes arrived garbled, late, hostile, heartbreaking, and once cruelly, in her own grandmother's voice off the hold's old signal logs. To see if she would follow procedure anyway, she did. She filed a formal complaint about the method afterward, citing page 9 generations long, and the examining board upheld the complaint, struck the exercise from the syllabus forever, and passed her with the highest marks recorded since the founding of the service, and Dane Okafor, who had submitted the complaint alongside her and testified at the review in the antique dialect for the sheer point of it, stood at the back of the certification hall with the entire shore leave population of the Catchwater and most of her family, human and gray, and started the applause. She took the watch at Turnhill Light on the first morning of the new year, 304 days after a handshake crossed 40 trillion kilometers and was answered in 4/10 of a second. The ceremony was 60 seconds long, which Ren had learned by then was how Earth marked its very largest things. The smaller the ceremony, the older the wait. Asha signed the watchbook closed. Ren signed it open. The retiring keeper said the words that 246 keepers had said before her. "The light is yours." Keep it lit until everyone's home, and went down the hill into the rest of her life, and Wren Calloway, born in the void between stars, daughter of a ship that no longer flew and a world that had never stopped waiting for her, climbed the lamproom stairs alone and took the oldest desk on Earth. The work was the work. She kept the log in the required hand. She maintained the handshake racks to the standard, by hand. She drilled the half-second answer until her own heartbeat learned to wait for it, and stood at the glass in the high wind watching the anchor line throw its white pillars at the sky, and learned the hill's weathers the way she had once learned a ship's, now by soul and skin and the small hairs of the arm. And at the end of her first watch day, at dusk, she did the thing she had been planning since the stone steps, the thing she had cleared with the registry, who had listened to her proposal in silence and then adopted it as standing doctrine for every returner light on the planet before she had finished her tea. She opened the deep array channel, all 11 corridors, and the 12th, the wide new one, aimed at the volumes of sky where a drift of gray giants might, someday, be drifting, listening with the patience of stone and love. She keyed the transmitter that had once thrown her family's promise across the dark, and in the old dialect, in the clear evening, with the light burning steady over her shoulder and below her, on the plain and the half-built ribs of the Ishan standing against the sunset like the start of a sentence, she said what the hill had been saying for 247 years. What? She now understood her whole strange life between two species had been one long proof of all stations, all hulls, all souls still out. This is Turn Hill Light, Earth. The watch continues. We have your corridors. We have your names. We are not waiting for you to be probable. We are waiting for you. A breath, the wind, the sea. The field is dry. She released the key, and the light of Turn Hill stood at her back and burned across the water the way it had burned every hour of every year since her people went out, ready to answer inside the half-second, tonight and tomorrow, and for as long as anyone anywhere was still on the road home. Far out over the Atlantic dark, beyond the last buoy, beyond the shipping lanes, beyond every chart her grandmother ever copied, the empty evening said nothing back. But the watchbook's first page had it right. There was no third condition. And 11 years later, when the Ishan rose off the anchor line on her first flight with a tending lamp burning at her heart and half the drifts old, codes already answered out of the deep sky, when the gray ships came in from the long dark one by one, over a decade like relatives arriving late and amazed to a feast, when the Catchwater shore had to invent a second harbor, and Wren Calloway, keeper emerita at 30, stood on the hill she would never really leave and watched a found drift and a kept promise fill the morning sky over the port together. By then, every child on two worlds knew the whole of the law by heart the way she had learned it as a lullaby. Someone keeps the light. Someone comes home to it. And when they come, however late, however changed, however far, the world has grown past every story they packed for the journey, the light answers, in under half a second, in their own tongue, with the only sentence that was ever worth keeping lit. The light is green.